The ceramic shards scattered across the hardwood floor like broken promises, and among the dark soil that spilled from the overturned pot, something metallic caught the afternoon light streaming through our living room window. My heart stopped. There, nestled in the earth like buried secrets, lay a small brass key attached to a safety deposit box tag, a micro SD card wrapped in plastic, and what looked like a folded piece of paper with my father's handwriting on it. I dropped to my knees, my cleaning rag forgotten, as 23 years of marriage suddenly felt like 23 years of living with a stranger. Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge tales of life. Enjoy listening. My name is Eileen Kyler Francisco, and until that Thursday afternoon in March, I believed I knew my husband. I believed in our life together, in the quiet suburban home we'd built, in the man who kissed my forehead every morning before work and called me sweetheart, in front of our friends. I believed that the cracks in our marriage were normal, that every couple went through rough patches, that love meant enduring the small cruelties and the slow erosion of self-worth that had become my daily reality. I was 47 years old and had spent the last decade walking on eggshells in my own home. It started so gradually that I barely noticed. Rick had always been particular about his things. His coffee mug had to be washed a certain way, his newspapers folded just so, his beloved ficus plant positioned exactly 3 feet from the south-facing window. But somewhere along the way, his preferences became rules. His suggestions became commands, and my opinions became inconveniences. "Eileen, you're being too sensitive," became his favorite phrase whenever I tried to express hurt or frustration. "You're imagining things," he'd say with that patient smile that made me feel like a hysterical child. "You know how you get when you're stressed." How I got when I was stressed, apparently, was accurate about things that were actually happening. The gaslighting was so subtle, so expertly crafted, that I began to doubt my own perceptions. When I mentioned that he seemed distant, he'd remind me of all the ways he showed love, the flowers he brought home, always when he'd been particularly cruel the day before, the expensive dinners where he'd spend the evening on his phone, the weekend trips where he'd disappear for hours, claiming he needed space to think. Our daughter Angel, now 23 and fresh out of college, had started noticing the dynamic during her last few visits home. She'd watch with sharp eyes as Rick dismissed my comments at dinner, as he corrected my stories in front of guests, as he made decisions about our social calendar without consulting me. "Mom," she'd said just last month, her voice careful and concerned, "you know you don't have to agree with everything he says, right? You're allowed to have your own opinions." The fact that my own daughter felt the need to remind me of this basic truth should have been my wake-up call. Instead, I'd made excuses the way I always did. "Your father's just particular, honey. Marriage is about compromise." But Angel's eyes had filled with something that looked like pity, and that look haunted me for weeks. Rick's family had never made things easier. His mother, Cecilia, was a steel magnolia with a tongue like a razor blade, always ready with a comment about my housekeeping, my cooking, my parenting, my career choices. "Rick works so hard," she'd say with a sigh whenever I mentioned feeling overwhelmed. "The least you could do is keep a proper home for him." His brother Desmond was worse. A bully who'd learned to hide his cruelty behind jokes and just kidding disclaimers. He'd make cutting remarks about my appearance, my intelligence, my worth, always with that same smirk Rick wore when he was correcting me. The two brothers fed off each other's energy, turning family gatherings into subtle competitions to see who could diminish me more effectively. The only ally I had in Rick's family was his sister-in-law, Tamara, Desmond's wife, who'd married into this dysfunction 5 years ago and recognized it for what it was. She'd catch my eye across the dinner table when the men were being particularly awful, offering silent solidarity and the occasional escape to help in the kitchen where we could breathe freely for a few minutes. "They're not normal, Eileen," she'd whispered to me at last Christmas, while we washed dishes and listened to Desmond berate their teenage son in the next room. "The way they treat women, the way they talk to us, it's not okay." But Tamara was trapped too, with 2 young children and a husband who controlled every aspect of their finances. We were both drowning in different pools of the same toxic water. The morning I broke the ficus pot started like any other. Rick had left for his job at the insurance firm with his usual perfunctory kiss and his usual list of things for me to accomplish while he was gone. The house needed to be spotless for his mother's visit that weekend, The grocery shopping needed to be done according to the specific list he'd left on the counter, and his study needed to be dusted, but carefully because everything had to be put back exactly where it belonged. I'd been working part-time as a freelance graphic designer since Angel left for college, trying to rebuild the career I'd abandoned when she was born. Rick tolerated this as long as it didn't interfere with my primary responsibilities, and as long as I didn't make more money than he was comfortable with. Whenever a project started going well, whenever a client wanted to expand our working relationship, Rick would suddenly need more attention, more care, more of my time devoted to maintaining his comfort. I was in the living room, dusting around his precious ficus, a plant he'd had since before we met, which he claimed was irreplaceable and which I was forbidden from moving or repotting, when my phone rang. It was Angel, calling from her apartment in Portland where she was working at a non-profit and living the kind of independent life I'd forgotten was possible. "Hey Mom," her voice was bright but concerned. "I've been thinking about our conversation last week. About you maybe talking to someone. A therapist, I mean." I'd mentioned, in a moment of weakness, that I'd been feeling lost lately, like I didn't recognize myself anymore. Angel had immediately suggested counseling, but the idea terrified me. What if a therapist confirmed what I was starting to suspect? That I'd wasted decades of my life, that I'd allowed myself to become a shadow of who I used to be. "I don't know, honey," I said, stretching the phone cord as I reached to dust the windowsill behind the ficus. "Your father thinks therapy is just an excuse for people who can't handle their problems." "Mom." Angel's voice was sharp. "Who cares what Dad thinks about therapy? This is about you. About what you need." The radical idea that my needs might matter, that they might even take precedence over Rick's opinions, was so foreign that I actually laughed. But it was a bitter sound, and as I turned to respond to Angel, my elbow caught the edge of the ficus pot. Time slowed as I watched 23 years of careful obedience shatter against the hardwood floor. And the ficus itself lay on its side, roots exposed, looking as vulnerable and displaced as I felt most days. "Mom? Mom, what was that noise?" Angel's voice seemed to come from very far away. I was staring at the mess, calculating how much trouble I was in when I saw them. The objects that would change everything, nestled in the soil like secrets finally coming to light. "I have to call you back," I whispered into the phone and hung up before Angel could respond. My hands shook as I picked up the brass key first. It was small, the kind used for safety deposit boxes, and attached to it was a tag with numbers I didn't recognize and a bank logo from across town. A bank where we didn't have any accounts as far as I knew. The micro SD card was wrapped carefully in plastic, protected from moisture and soil. Someone had taken great care to preserve whatever was stored on it. But it was the piece of paper that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. It was a photocopy of a letter, written in my father's distinctive handwriting. The same careful script he'd used to write me notes throughout my childhood. The same writing I'd seen on birthday cards and Christmas gifts, and the last letter he'd ever sent me before his death 3 years ago. The letter was addressed to Rick, dated just 2 months before my father's death, and it began, "Rick, I'm writing to confirm our discussion about Eileen's inheritance and the foundation we discussed establishing in my name." I read the letter 3 times before the words fully penetrated. My father, who had died of cancer after a long battle, who had spent his final months worried about leaving me financially secure, had apparently made arrangements with Rick. Arrangements I knew nothing about. According to the letter, my father had left a substantial sum of money I'd never known existed, to be used for establishing a charitable foundation in his memory. The foundation was supposed to support cancer research and patient advocacy, causes that had been close to his heart after his diagnosis. Rick was to be the executor, but the foundation was to be established in my name as my father's only child. I had never heard a word about any of this. The letter went on to detail account numbers, legal documents that needed to be filed, and a timeline for establishing the foundation. It mentioned meetings with lawyers, discussions about tax implications, and Rick's assurance that he would handle everything so that I wouldn't be burdened during my grief. My father had died believing that his legacy would live on through meaningful work done in his name. I had spent 3 years believing that he'd left me nothing but memories and a few pieces of jewelry. Where was the money? Where was the foundation? Where were the legal documents? And why had Rick hidden this letter in a ficus pot like some kind of buried treasure? I sat on the floor surrounded by soil and ceramic shards, holding my father's letter, and felt something crack open inside my chest. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was rage. Pure, clean rage that I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Rick had stolen my father's final gift to me. He had stolen my father's legacy, his hope for making a difference in the world, his trust in the man he thought was taking care of his daughter. But this was just the beginning. I carefully extracted the micro SD card from its plastic wrapping and took it to my laptop. My hands were steadier now, fueled by a fury that felt almost foreign after years of suppressing every strong emotion. The card contained dozens of files. Photos, documents, audio recordings, and what appeared to be a detailed log of dates, times, and activities. As I opened the first folder, I realized I was looking at surveillance photos of myself. Photos of me leaving the house, entering the grocery store, meeting Tamara for coffee, working in my home office. Photos taken from a distance with a telephoto lens by someone who had been watching me for months, maybe years. The timestamps showed that these photos had been taken on days when Rick claimed to be at work, during hours when he was supposed to be in meetings or handling client calls. My husband had been stalking me. But as I scrolled through more files, I discovered that I wasn't his only subject. There were photos of Angel, my daughter, taken near her apartment in Portland, near her workplace, near the coffee shop where she met friends. Photos of her that Rick couldn't possibly have taken himself, which meant he was paying someone else to watch our daughter. I became confused. The audio files were worse. Recordings of phone conversations. My conversations with Angel, with Tamara, with my few remaining friends. Conversations I'd had in my own home in what I'd believed was privacy. Rick had been recording me, listening to my private thoughts, my fears, my moments of doubt about our marriage. In one recording, I heard myself talking to Angel about feeling trapped, about wondering if I'd made a mistake staying in the marriage for so long. In another, I was talking to Tamara about Rick's controlling behavior, about how he made me feel small and stupid. He had been collecting evidence of my disloyalty, building a case against me like I was a criminal in my own life. The documents folder contained legal papers that made my stomach drop. Divorce papers already filled out with terms that would leave me with almost nothing. A custody agreement that would give Rick primary custody of Angel, despite the fact that she was 23 years old and living independently. Restraining order applications, claiming that I was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous. And most chilling of all, a psychiatric evaluation report with my name on it, claiming that I suffered from paranoid delusions, depression, and emotional instability. The report was signed by a doctor I'd never met, dated just 2 weeks ago. Rick had been building a case to have me declared mentally incompetent. He had been planning to take everything, my father's money, my daughter, my freedom, my sanity, and leave me with nothing but a diagnosis of mental illness and a reputation as an unstable woman who couldn't be trusted. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the evidence of my husband's betrayal. The afternoon light shifted across the floor, illuminating the broken pot and scattered soil, and I felt like I was seeing my life clearly for the first time in decades. Every fight we'd had, every time he'd made me feel crazy or oversensitive, every moment when I doubted my own perceptions, it had all been calculated. He had been systematically destroying my sense of reality, my confidence, my connections to other people, preparing for the day when he would take everything and leave me powerless to fight back. The cruelest part was that he'd used my father's trust to do it. My father, who had loved me unconditionally, who had worried about my future, who had tried to provide for me even after his death. Rick had betrayed him too. I thought about my father's final weeks, how he'd seemed relieved about something, how he'd told me not to worry about money, that Rick would take care of everything. I'd assumed he meant that Rick would take care of me emotionally, support me through my grief. I'd never imagined that my father had left me a substantial inheritance, or that Rick had been planning to steal it from the moment my father died. The rage that had been building in my chest crystallized into something harder and more focused. This wasn't just about money or even about the surveillance and manipulation. This was about my father's memory, about the good he'd wanted to do in the world, about the trust he'd placed in a man who had proven himself utterly unworthy of it. Rick thought he was so clever, so careful in his planning. He thought I was too broken, too dependent, too afraid to fight back. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I spent the rest of the afternoon carefully documenting everything I'd found. I photographed every document, copied every file, and made detailed notes about dates and timelines. I researched the bank where the safety deposit box was located and discovered that it was indeed real, and that according to their records, It had been opened 3 years ago, just after my father's death. I also did something I hadn't done in years. I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I called Georgina Kyler, my cousin who specialized in family law and who had been trying to reconnect with me for years. Rick had always discouraged my relationship with Georgina, claiming that she was too aggressive and always stirring up trouble. Now I understood why he'd wanted to keep me away from someone who would recognize his manipulation tactics and know how to fight them. Eileen. Georgina's voice was surprised but warm when she answered. It's been so long. How are you? I need help, I said simply. I think my husband has been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so he can steal my inheritance. There was a pause and then Georgina's voice became sharp and professional. Where are you right now? Are you safe? I'm at home. He's at work. Georgina, I found evidence. A lot of evidence. Photos, recordings, forged documents, legal papers. He's been planning this for years. Don't touch anything else. Don't clean up whatever mess led you to find this evidence. I'm coming over right now and I'm bringing a colleague who specializes in financial fraud. We're going to document everything properly and then we're going to destroy him. The fierce protectiveness in Georgina's voice made me realize how long it had been since anyone had been unequivocally on my side. I started crying, not the careful, quiet tears I'd learned to shed so as not to upset Rick, but huge, ugly sobs of relief and rage and grief for all the years I'd lost. Eileen, Georgina said gently, you're going to be okay. We're going to make sure of that. But I need you to do something for me right now. What? I need you to call Angel and tell her to be very careful. If your husband has been having her watched, if he's planning to claim custody over an adult woman, then he's more dangerous than we initially thought. She needs to know what's happening. The thought of Angel being in danger because of Rick's twisted plans sent a fresh wave of fury through me. My daughter, my brilliant, independent, strong daughter, was being stalked and threatened by the man who was supposed to love and protect her. I called Angel immediately. Mom, you sound upset. What happened with the thing that broke? Angel, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your father has been having you watched. He has photos of you taken near your apartment and your work. I found evidence that he's been planning to file for some kind of custody claim over you, even though you're an adult. I need you to be very careful about your surroundings and I need you to come home. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that I thought the call had dropped. Angel. Mom. Her voice was very quiet, very controlled. Are you telling me that Dad has been stalking me? Yes. And me. And he's been recording our phone conversations. There's so much more. He stole money that Grandpa left for us, money that was supposed to go to a cancer research foundation. He's been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. I'm getting in my car right now, Angel interrupted. I'll be there in 5 hours. Mom, do not confront him. Do not let him know that you found anything. Can you clean up whatever mess you made and pretend everything is normal until I get there? The fact that my 23-year-old daughter was giving me safety instructions about my own husband should have been humiliating. Instead, it felt like a lifeline. Georgina is coming over to help document everything. She's bringing another lawyer. Good. Mom. Angel's voice cracked slightly. I'm so sorry. I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined. I should have pushed harder, should have made you leave him years ago. This isn't your fault, baby. It's not yours either, Mom. Remember that. Georgina arrived within an hour, accompanied by a tall woman with silver hair who introduced herself as Dr. Vance, a forensic accountant who specialized in cases involving financial abuse and fraud. They took one look at the broken pot, the scattered evidence, and my tear-stained face and immediately took charge. First things first, Georgina said, pulling on latex gloves. We document everything exactly as you found it. Vance is going to photograph the scene, and then we're going to carefully catalog every piece of evidence. Dr. Vance was already setting up professional camera equipment. Eileen, I want you to walk me through exactly what happened. How did you find these items? What was your first reaction? I need to establish a clear timeline. As I told them the story, they worked with methodical precision. Every document was photographed in place before being carefully removed and placed in evidence bags. Every file on the micro SD card was copied and verified. The safety deposit box key was examined and traced back to its origin. This is extensive, Dr. Vance said grimly as she reviewed the financial documents. Your husband has been planning this for at least 3 years, possibly longer. The level of documentation, the forged psychiatric evaluation, the surveillance. This isn't impulsive behavior. This is a long-term campaign designed to isolate you and steal your assets. Georgina was examining the divorce papers Rick had prepared. These terms are unconscionable. He's claiming that you're mentally unstable and financially irresponsible, and he's asking for full control of all marital assets, including assets that predate the marriage. Eileen, did you ever sign anything giving him power of attorney? No. I don't think so. He always handled the paperwork for everything, said it was easier if he just took care of the business side of our marriage. Georgina and Dr. Vance exchanged a look that made my stomach clench. We need to check, Georgina said. If he's forged your signature on legal documents, that's a felony. But first we need to secure your father's inheritance. Cecilia, can you trace the money? Dr. Vance was already on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The safety deposit box was opened 3 years ago, 2 weeks after your father's death. According to bank records, it's been accessed regularly, about once a month. The most recent access was last week. What's in it? We won't know until we open it, but based on these documents, I suspect we'll find the original will, the foundation paperwork, and possibly evidence of where the money has gone. Georgina stood up, brushing soil off her knees. Eileen, we're going to that bank right now. You're going to use that key and we're going to see exactly what your husband has been hiding. But what if he finds out? What if he comes home and sees the broken pot? We're going to clean this up and make it look like an accident. Dr. Vance said. You're going to tell him that you broke his plant, you're very sorry, and you've ordered a replacement pot. You're going to act like the submissive wife he expects you to be, just for a little while longer. The idea of pretending, of going back to the performance of being Rick's compliant wife, made me feel sick. But I understood the strategy. We needed time to build our case, to secure the evidence, to make sure he couldn't destroy anything or disappear with the money. How long? I asked. A few days, maybe a week, Georgina said. Just long enough to get everything in order. And then we're going to destroy him so completely that he'll never be able to hurt you or anyone else again. The safety deposit box contained a treasure trove of evidence that painted an even more damning picture of Rick's betrayal. My father's original will was there, along with a letter of instruction that made his intentions crystal clear. He had left me $800,000. Money from the sale of his house, his life insurance, and investments he'd made over the years. The money was specifically designated for establishing the Maximiliano Keiler Foundation for Cancer Research and Patient Advocacy, with me as the primary administrator and beneficiary. There were also legal documents that Rick had never filed, documents that would have established the foundation and given me control over the funds. Instead, he had transferred the money into accounts under his sole control, using forged power of attorney documents that bore my signature. A signature I had definitely never written. But the most shocking discovery was a folder labeled insurance policies. Life insurance policies on both me and Angel that Rick had taken out without our knowledge. The policies were substantial and they had been purchased just 6 months ago. He's been planning to destroy us, I whispered, staring at the documents. Not necessarily, Dr. Vance said carefully. But he's certainly been planning for the possibility of your deaths. Combined with the psychiatric evaluation and the custody papers, this suggests that he was preparing multiple scenarios. If he couldn't have you declared incompetent, if you fought back or tried to leave. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Georgina was photographing everything with grim efficiency. Eileen, this is enough evidence to put him away for a very long time. Fraud, forgery, identity theft, financial abuse. And depending on what we find when we dig deeper, possibly conspiracy and attempted murder. But I don't want him to go to prison, I said, surprising myself. I do, but that's not enough. Prison would be too easy. He'd become the victim, the poor man whose crazy wife destroyed his life. His family would rally around him, make excuses, blame me for everything. Georgina looked at me with something like pride. What do you want, Eileen? I thought about my father, about the good he'd wanted to do in the world. I thought about Angel, about the fear in her voice when she realized she'd been stalked. I thought about Tamara, trapped in her own toxic marriage, and about all the other women who might fall victim to Rick's manipulation in the future. I want him exposed, I said. I want everyone to know exactly who he is and what he's done. I want his family to see the truth, his coworkers, his friends. I want the foundation established the way my father intended, and I want Rick to lose everything. His reputation, his job, his family's respect, his sense of control. I want him to feel as powerless and humiliated as he's made me feel for 23 years. That, Georgina said with a fierce smile, we can definitely arrange. Angel arrived that evening just as Rick was pulling into the driveway. I had spent the afternoon cleaning up the broken pot, ordering a replacement online, and practicing my performance of contrition and anxiety. When Rick walked through the door, I was waiting with the apologetic, nervous energy he expected from me. "Rick, I'm so sorry," I began before he'd even set down his briefcase. "I was cleaning and I accidentally knocked over your ficus. I broke the pot, but the plant is okay and I've already ordered a new pot exactly like the old one." I watched his face carefully, looking for signs that he suspected anything. But Rick was so accustomed to my clumsiness, so used to my accidents and apologies, that he barely seemed surprised. "Where's the plant now?" he asked with the long-suffering patience of a man dealing with an incompetent child. "In the kitchen. I repotted it in a temporary container until the new pot arrives." He nodded, already dismissing the incident. "Try to be more careful, Eileen. That pot was irreplaceable." If only he knew how irreplaceable it really was, and how much I'd learned from breaking it. Angel appeared in the doorway, having entered through the back door while Rick and I were talking. "Hi, Dad. I decided to come home for a surprise visit." Rick's face lit up with genuine pleasure. Whatever else he did love Angel. Or at least he loved his version of her, the successful daughter who reflected well on his parenting. He had no idea that she was here to help me destroy him. "Angel. What a wonderful surprise. How long can you stay?" "Just a few days. I wanted to spend some time with Mom, maybe help her with some projects around the house." Over dinner, Angel and I performed our roles perfectly. We chatted about her job, her apartment, her friends, all while Rick listened with the benevolent attention of a man who believed he was the center of his family's universe. He had no idea that his wife and daughter were planning his downfall between requests to pass the salt. That night, after Rick had gone to bed, Angel and I sat in the kitchen and planned our strategy. "Georgina thinks we should move fast," I whispered. "The longer we wait, the more chance there is that he'll discover what we know." "What about Tamara? And his mother and Desmond? Are we going to warn them?" I thought about Cecilia's years of subtle cruelty, about Desmond's bullying, about the way they'd all participated in making me feel small and worthless. Tamara, yes. She deserves to know what kind of family she married into. But the others, they're going to find out the same way everyone else does. Angel nodded grimly. "What about his job? His friends?" "Everyone," I said. "Everyone who ever believed his version of me, everyone who ever thought I was the problem in this marriage. They're all going to learn the truth." The next morning, while Rick was at work, Georgina arrived with a team of investigators and forensic accountants. We had 24 hours to gather additional evidence before we made our move. They found more than we'd ever imagined. Rick's computer contained years of correspondence with private investigators, detailing not just surveillance of me and Angel, but also background checks on my friends, my family members, anyone who might influence me or offer me support. He had been systematically identifying and neutralizing my support network for years. There were also emails with his brother Desmond, discussing strategies for managing me and Tamara. The two brothers had been coordinating their efforts, sharing techniques for psychological manipulation and control. Desmond had been testing methods on Tamara that Rick then used on me. Most damning of all, they found communications with a doctor. The same doctor who had signed the forged psychiatric evaluation. Rick had been paying him to create false medical records not just for me but for other women as well. This wasn't just personal abuse. It was part of a larger pattern of predatory behavior. "Eileen," Georgina said, her voice tight with anger, "your husband and his brother are running what amounts to a criminal enterprise. They're systematically abusing women, stealing their assets, and using forged medical documents to cover their tracks. You're not their first victim." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All those years of thinking I was the problem, that I was too sensitive or too difficult. I had been the victim of a calculated criminal conspiracy. "How many others?" I asked. "We're still investigating, but we found evidence of at least 3 other women over the past 10 years. All of them ended up divorced, declared mentally incompetent and stripped of their assets." All of them are now living in poverty while their ex-husbands control their former wealth. I thought about those women, about the lives that had been destroyed by Rick and Desmond's greed and cruelty. I thought about how they must have felt, how they must have blamed themselves, how they must have wondered what they'd done wrong. We're going to help them too, I said. When we expose Rick and Desmond, we're going to make sure those women get justice as well. Georgina smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. We spent the next 2 days building an airtight case. Georgina worked with prosecutors to prepare criminal charges. Dr. Vance traced every dollar of my father's stolen inheritance and identified the accounts where Rick had hidden the money. The investigators compiled evidence of the surveillance, the forged documents, and the conspiracy with Desmond. Meanwhile, I played my role perfectly. I was the apologetic wife, worried about the broken pot, grateful for Rick's patience with my clumsiness. I cooked his favorite meals, asked about his day, and gave him no reason to suspect that anything had changed. It was as if heaven smiled at me that he forgot totally what he was hiding in the ficus pot. I was transforming. Every submissive smile, every deferential gesture, every moment of pretending to be the woman he'd tried to make me, it all felt like armor now, protection while I prepared for battle. Angel was magnificent. She chatted with her father about her job, her friends, her plans for the future, all while secretly recording conversations and gathering additional evidence. Rick, basking in what he thought was his daughter's admiration, revealed more about his plans than he ever would have if he'd known she was working against him. On Thursday evening, Tamara came over for dinner. Rick was always on his best behavior when we had guests, playing the role of the devoted husband and father. But Tamara knew what to look for now, and I could see her cataloging every subtle put-down, every moment of control, every sign of the abuse she'd been too isolated to recognize in her own marriage. After dinner, while Rick was in his study, Tamara, Angel, and I sat in the living room and I told her everything. Tamara listened in stunned silence as I described the evidence we'd found, the conspiracy between Rick and Desmond, the other victims, the stolen inheritance. When I finished, she was crying. I knew something was wrong, she whispered. Desmond has been so controlling lately, so paranoid about money and my activities. He's been asking strange questions about my family, about any inheritance I might receive when my parents die. And he's been pushing me to sign papers, financial documents that he says are just for estate planning. Don't sign anything, Angel said urgently. And Tamara, you need to get out. Tonight if possible. I can't. The kids. We'll help you, I said. Georgina has resources, safe houses, legal support. You don't have to do this alone. Tamara looked at me with something like awe. You're really going to destroy them, aren't you? I'm going to expose them, I corrected. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who they are and what they've done. And then I'm going to use my father's money the way he intended, to help people, to make a difference, to create something good out of all this evil. Friday morning, Georgina called with the news I'd been waiting for. Everything is in place, she said. The prosecutors are ready to file charges. The bank has frozen Rick's accounts. The insurance companies have been notified about the fraudulent policies. And I've prepared a comprehensive dossier for his employer, his professional associations, and his social circle. What about the media? I have a contact at the local news station who specializes in financial fraud cases. She's very interested in the story, especially the angle about the stolen charity money and the multiple victims. I took a deep breath. Then let's do it. Eileen, once we start this, there's no going back. Are you sure you're ready? I thought about my father, about the foundation he'd wanted to create. I thought about the other women Rick and Desmond had victimized. I thought about Angel, about the life she deserved to live free from fear and surveillance. I thought about Tamara and her children, about the chance to save them from years of abuse. I'm ready. Then we begin in 1 hour. Rick will be arrested at his office. Desmond will be arrested at his home. The story will break on the evening news. By tomorrow morning, everyone in their social and professional circles will know exactly who they really are. After I hung up, I sat in the living room where I'd broken the ficus pot just a week ago. The new pot had arrived and Rick's plant was thriving in its temporary home in the kitchen. Soon I would replant it in its new container, but I would never again be afraid of disturbing Rick's precious possessions. Angel found me there, staring out the window at the life I was about to reclaim. How do you feel, Mom? Powerful, I said, and realized it was true. For the first time in 23 years, I feel powerful. The arrests happened simultaneously at 2 p.m. on Friday afternoon. Rick was taken into custody at his office, in front of his colleagues and clients, charged with fraud, forgery, identity theft, conspiracy, and financial abuse. The charges were read aloud in the lobby of his prestigious insurance firm, where he'd spent years building a reputation as a trustworthy family man and pillar of the community. Desmond was arrested at his home, where Tamara had already left with the children and a suitcase full of evidence she'd gathered from his home office. The look on his face when he realized his wife had outsmarted him was, according to the arresting officer, absolutely priceless. I wasn't there to see either arrest, but Georgina called me with updates throughout the afternoon. By 3 p.m., both men were in custody, their assets were frozen, and the investigation into their other victims was officially underway. At 6 p.m., the local news led with the story: local insurance executive and brother charged in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme targeting wives and elderly victims. Angel and I watched the broadcast together, holding hands on the couch where I'd spent so many years walking on eggshells. The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Loretta Dominic, had done her homework. She detailed not just the charges against Rick and Desmond, but also the pattern of abuse, the stolen charity money, and the impact on the victims. Maximiliano Kyler, who died of cancer 3 years ago, left $800,000 to establish a foundation for cancer research in his memory, Dominic reported. Instead, his son-in-law allegedly stole the money and used forged documents to have his wife declared mentally incompetent. Tonight, that wife is speaking out. The camera cut to an interview Georgina had arranged earlier that day. I barely recognized myself. The woman on screen was confident, articulate, and furious in the best possible way. My father fought cancer for 2 years, I heard myself saying. He spent his final months planning a legacy that would help other families facing the same battle. My husband stole that legacy, betrayed my father's trust, and spent 3 years gaslighting me into believing I was losing my mind. But the only thing I lost was my fear of him. The story included interviews with Dr. Vance about the financial fraud, with Georgina about the legal implications, and with a prosecutor who promised that this was just the beginning of a much larger investigation. But the most powerful moment came when Dominic asked me what I planned to do next. "I'm going to establish my father's foundation exactly as he intended," I said, looking directly into the camera. "The Maximiliano Kyler Foundation will support cancer research, patient advocacy, and, thanks to what I've learned through this experience, resources for women escaping financial abuse. My father wanted to help people, and that's exactly what we're going to do." The phone started ringing before the broadcast was even over. The first call was from Cecilia, Rick's mother, screaming about how I'd destroyed her son's life and demanding that I fix this mess immediately. I listened to her rage for about 30 seconds before hanging up. For the first time in 23 years, I didn't care what Cecilia Francisco thought about anything. The second call was from Rick himself, calling from jail. "Eileen, you have to listen to me." His voice was desperate, all traces of his usual condescending patience gone. "This is all a misunderstanding. Those documents, the surveillance, I was trying to protect you. You've been so unstable lately, so paranoid. I was gathering evidence to get you help. Even now, even caught red-handed with overwhelming evidence of his crimes, he was still trying to gaslight me." "Rick," I said calmly, "I want you to listen very carefully. I know about the other women. I know about the forged psychiatric evaluations. I know about the life insurance policies you took out on me and Angel. I know about the conspiracy with Desmond. I know everything." There was silence on the other end of the line. "The only unstable person in this marriage was you," I continued. "You're a criminal, a predator, and a pathetic excuse for a human being. And now everyone knows it. Eileen, please. Don't ever contact me again. Don't contact Angel. Don't contact anyone in my family. Your lawyer can communicate with my lawyer. That's the only communication we'll ever have again." I hung up and immediately blocked his number. The third call was from a woman I didn't recognize. "Is this Eileen Francisco? The woman from the news?" "Yes. My name is Linda Amir. I think my husband did to me what your husband did to you." My heart clenched. "Tell me." Linda's story was heartbreakingly familiar. She'd been married to Desmond's business partner 5 years ago. Slowly, systematically, her husband had isolated her from friends and family, convinced her she was mentally unstable, and eventually had her committed to a psychiatric facility against her will. While she was institutionalized, he'd divorced her and taken control of all their assets, including an inheritance she'd received from her grandmother. I've been living in a studio apartment working minimum wage jobs for 3 years, Linda said, her voice shaking. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. My own family won't talk to me because they believe what he told them about my mental state. But when I saw your story tonight, when I heard about the forged psychiatric evaluations. Linda, I said firmly, you're not crazy. You were victimized by criminals. And we're going to help you get your life back. By the end of the evening, I'd received calls from 6 other women with similar stories. Georgina was right. Rick and Desmond had been running a criminal enterprise and we'd only scratched the surface. The weekend brought a media frenzy that exceeded anything I could have imagined. The story went viral on social media, picked up by national news outlets, and sparked conversations about financial abuse, gaslighting, and the vulnerability of women in controlling marriages. #JusticeForLean started trending, along with #Maximiliano Kyler Foundation and #financial abuse. But more importantly, it brought forward more victims. By Monday morning, Georgina's office had been contacted by 12 women with stories of systematic abuse, financial fraud, and forged medical documents. The pattern was always the same: isolation, gaslighting, gradual financial control, and then sudden legal action to strip the women of their assets and credibility. The prosecutors expanded their investigation, and federal authorities got involved when they realized the scope of the conspiracy. Rick and Desmond hadn't just been targeting their own wives. They'd been running a network that included corrupt doctors, complicit lawyers, and private investigators who specialized in manufacturing evidence against vulnerable women. Cecilia Francisco, Rick's mother, tried to rally support for her sons by giving interviews claiming that I was a vindictive ex-wife who had manipulated the media. But her efforts backfired spectacularly when one of the reporters discovered that she'd been receiving regular payments from Rick's fraudulent accounts, payments that came directly from my father's stolen inheritance. The revelation that Rick's own mother had been profiting from his crimes destroyed any remaining sympathy for the family. Cecilia went from grieving mother to co-conspirator in the public eye, and the Francisco family name became synonymous with greed and betrayal. Desmond's wife Tamar became a hero in her own right. Her decision to gather evidence and leave with her children inspired other women in abusive relationships, and she started appearing on talk shows to discuss the warning signs of financial abuse. She and I became close friends, bonded by our shared experience and our determination to help other women avoid the same fate. 3 months later, I stood in the conference room of a downtown law firm, surrounded by the other victims of Rick and Desmond's crimes. We were there for the final settlement hearing, where the stolen assets would be returned and the foundation would be officially established. Linda Amir was there along with 8 other women whose lives had been destroyed by the conspiracy. Some of them had lost their homes, their children, their careers. All of them had lost years of their lives to the trauma of systematic abuse and the struggle to rebuild from nothing. But today they were getting their lives back. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who had clearly been appalled by the scope of the crimes, read the settlement terms aloud. Rick and Desmond would serve a minimum of 15 years in federal prison. Their assets, including the money they'd stolen from all of us, would be returned with interest. The corrupt doctors and lawyers who had participated in the conspiracy were facing their own criminal charges and civil lawsuits. Most importantly, the Maximiliano Kyler Foundation was being established with an initial endowment of $2.3 million. My father's original $800,000, plus the money stolen from the other victims, plus damages and interest. Mrs. Francisco, the judge said, looking directly at me, your father would be proud of what you've accomplished. This foundation will help cancer patients and abuse survivors for generations to come. I thought about my father, about his final letter expressing trust in Rick to take care of me. He'd been wrong about Rick, but he'd been right about something else. I was stronger than I knew and I was capable of taking care of myself and others. After the hearing, the victims and I went to lunch together. We'd formed an unlikely family, bonded by trauma but united in our determination to heal and help others. Several of the women had decided to work for the foundation, using their experiences to help other abuse survivors navigate the legal and financial challenges of escaping controlling relationships. Angel joined us for lunch, having driven down from Portland for the hearing. She'd taken a leave of absence from her job to help establish the foundation, and she was planning to move back home to work with me full-time. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said as we walked back to our cars. "Not just for what you did to Dad, but for who you've become. You're not the same person you were some months ago." He was right. The woman who had apologized for breaking a ficus pot was gone, replaced by someone I was still getting to know. Someone who spoke up in meetings, who made decisions without asking permission, who took up space in the world without apologizing for it. 6 months after Rick's arrest, I received a letter from him in prison. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was 3 pages of self-pity and manipulation, claiming that he'd only been trying to protect me, that he'd made mistakes but didn't deserve to lose everything, that I was being vindictive and cruel. The letter ended with a plea. "Eileen, I know you're angry, but we had 23 years together. That has to count for something. I'm asking you to forgive me, to help me appeal my sentence, to remember the good times we shared. I'm still your husband and I still love you." I read the letter, waiting to feel something. Anger, sadness, maybe even a trace of the old guilt and self-doubt. But all I felt was a kind of distant pity for a man who still didn't understand that love wasn't about control, that marriage wasn't about ownership, that forgiveness wasn't something he could demand or manipulate me into giving. I wrote back a single sentence. "I forgive you for my own peace, but I will never forget what you did, and I will never stop fighting to make sure you can't do it to anyone else." Then I filed for divorce. 1 year after breaking the ficus pot, I stood in the lobby of the Maximiliano Keiler Foundation's new offices, watching as Angel hung a portrait of my father on the wall. The foundation had already funded 3 research projects, established a support network for abuse survivors, and helped dozens of women escape controlling relationships. The ficus plant, Rick's precious, irreplaceable ficus, sat in a place of honor near the reception desk, thriving in a beautiful new pot that I'd chosen myself. It had become a symbol of resilience, of the way something could be uprooted and replanted and grow even stronger than before. Tamara stopped by that afternoon with her children, who were thriving in their new life free from Desmond's control. She'd started dating a kind man who treated her like an equal partner, and she was working on a book about financial abuse that would be published the following year. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked as we watched the kids play in the foundation's family room. "Destroying your marriage, I mean. Starting over at 47. I thought about the question seriously. My life was completely different now, smaller in some ways but infinitely larger in others. I lived in a modest apartment instead of a big house, but it was mine. I had less money than I'd had as Rick's wife, but I controlled every penny of it. I was single for the first time in decades, but I was learning to enjoy my own company. I didn't destroy my marriage," I said finally. "I exposed it. The marriage I thought I had never existed. It was just an elaborate performance designed to keep me controlled and compliant. What I have now is real. It's mine. And it's so much better than anything I had before." That evening, Angel and I had dinner at my apartment. She decided to stay in town permanently, working for the foundation and building a life that was entirely her own choice. We'd grown closer than we'd ever been, bonded not just as mother and daughter but as women who had survived something terrible and chosen to use that survival to help others. "Mom," Angel said as we cleaned up the dishes, "I have something to tell you." My heart skipped, wondering if she'd met someone, if she was moving away, if she was unhappy with her decision to stay. "I've been thinking about changing my name," she said. "I don't want to be Angel Francisco anymore. I want to be Angel Keiler, like you're going to be when the divorce is final." I stopped washing dishes and turned to look at her. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Francisco was never really my name anyway. It was just something I inherited from a man who turned out to be a criminal. Keiler is my grandfather's name, my heritage, my choice. And it's the name that's going to be associated with helping people instead of hurting them." I hugged her then, this brilliant young woman who had chosen to stand with me when it mattered most, who had helped me find my strength when I thought it was lost forever. 2 years later, I was invited to speak at a conference on domestic abuse and financial fraud. The audience was filled with lawyers, social workers, law enforcement officers, and survivors, people who were working to identify and stop the kind of systematic abuse that Rick and Desmond had perpetrated. I told them about the ficus pot, about the moment when my carefully controlled world shattered and revealed the truth underneath. I talked about the importance of believing women when they say something feels wrong, even when they can't articulate exactly what it is. I discussed the warning signs of financial abuse, the tactics of gaslighting, and the way predators use institutions, medical, legal, financial, to legitimize their control. But mostly I talked about transformation. I spent 23 years believing I was weak, I told the audience. I thought I was too sensitive, too emotional, too dependent to survive on my own. My husband and his family reinforced that belief every day, in 1,000 small ways that made me doubt my own perceptions and abilities. But here's what I learned. The strength was always there. The intelligence, the courage, the capacity for independence. It was all there, just buried under years of systematic conditioning designed to make me forget who I really was. Breaking that ficus pot mistakenly didn't just reveal my husband's crimes. It revealed my own power. And once I remembered that I had power, once I decided to use it, there was nothing he could do to stop me. 5 years after Rick's arrest, the Maximiliano Keiler Foundation had become a nationally recognized organization. We'd helped hundreds of abuse survivors, funded groundbreaking research, and successfully lobbied for legislation that made financial abuse easier to prosecute and harder to hide. Rick and Desmond were still in prison, their appeals having been denied multiple times. The other members of their conspiracy had been convicted and sentenced, and several copycat operations had been shut down using the investigative techniques developed during our case. I'd never remarried, though I'd dated occasionally. I'd discovered that I enjoyed being single, enjoyed making decisions without consulting anyone, enjoyed the peace of a home where I never had to worry about someone's mood or approval. Angel often joked that I'd become aggressively independent, and she wasn't wrong. But I'd also learned to trust again, to form deep friendships, to accept help when I needed it. The foundation had introduced me to an entire community of survivors and advocates, people who understood the journey from victim to survivor to thriver. On the 5th anniversary of breaking the ficus pot, I threw a party. Not a celebration of my divorce or Rick's imprisonment, but a celebration of the foundation, of the lives we'd changed, of the future we were building. The party was held in the foundation's main conference room, surrounded by photos of the people we'd helped and the projects we'd funded. Tamara was there with her new husband and their blended family. Linda Amir was there, now working as the foundation's financial counselor. Angel was there, having just been promoted to executive director. Georgina was there, having become not just my lawyer but one of my closest friends. And in the corner, thriving in its beautiful pot, was the ficus plant that had started it all. As I looked around the room at the faces of the people who had become my chosen family, I felt a deep sense of completion. Not the kind of ending that ties everything up in a neat bow, but the kind of resolution that comes from knowing you've used your pain to create something meaningful. Dr. Vance approached me with a glass of champagne and a knowing smile. "Eileen, I have some news that I think you'll appreciate." "What's that?" "Remember the corrupt psychiatrist who wrote your fake evaluation? Dr. Harrison." I nodded. He'd been one of the last conspirators to be sentenced, having fought the charges for years. His medical license was officially revoked today. He'll never be able to practice again, and he's facing a civil lawsuit from every woman whose life he helped destroy. The medical board cited your case specifically as an example of how the system failed to protect vulnerable patients. The news should have felt like victory, but instead it felt like justice. Quiet, inevitable, and long overdue. As the evening wound down, Angel found me standing by the window, looking out at the city lights. "Penny for your thoughts, Mom?" "I was thinking about your grandfather," I said. "About how he would have loved this. Not the drama or the pain, but this. The foundation, the work we're doing, the people we're helping. He always believed that good could come from suffering if you were willing to do the work." Angel slipped her arm through mine. "He'd be proud of you. Not just for surviving Dad, but for what you built afterward. You turned his stolen legacy into something even bigger than he originally imagined." He was right. The foundation had grown far beyond my father's original vision of cancer research. We now operated programs for financial abuse survivors, legal advocacy services, emergency housing assistance, and educational initiatives that taught young people to recognize the warning signs of controlling relationships. "Mom," Angel said softly, "can I ask you something I've always wondered about?" "Of course. Do you think Dad ever really loved you? Or was it all just manipulation from the beginning? I'd asked myself that question countless times over the years. In therapy, in quiet moments, in the middle of sleepless nights when the full scope of his betrayal would hit me anew. I think he loved the idea of me, I said finally. He loved having a wife who made him look good, who didn't challenge him, who made his life easier. But love, real love, requires seeing someone as they truly are and wanting them to be happy, even if their happiness doesn't serve you. Rick never saw me as a real person with my own needs and dreams. I was just a supporting character in his story. And now I'm the protagonist of my own story. And it's a much better story than the one he was writing for me. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in my apartment with a cup of tea and a photo album I'd been putting together. Pictures from the last 5 years, documenting not just the Foundation's work but my own transformation. There was a photo from my first television interview, where I looked terrified but determined. Pictures from Foundation events, where I gradually appeared more confident, more comfortable in my own skin. Photos with Angel, with Tamara, with the other survivors who had become my sisters in healing. And there, on the last page, was a picture Angel had taken just that morning. Me standing next to the ficus plant, both of us thriving in our new environment. I thought about the woman I'd been 5 years ago, the one who apologized for existing, who measured her worth by her husband's approval, who believed that keeping the peace was more important than keeping her dignity. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone I remembered with compassion but could barely recognize. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been dark nights when I questioned everything, when the loneliness felt overwhelming, when I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake in blowing up my life. There had been moments when Rick's voice in my head was louder than my own, when I almost believed that I really was crazy, vindictive, impossible to love. But those moments had become fewer and farther between, replaced by a growing sense of my own worth, my own power, my own capacity for joy. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the messages that had come in throughout the day. Congratulations from colleagues, updates from women the Foundation had helped, photos from Tamara's family vacation, a funny meme from Georgina. The next morning I woke up early and drove to the cemetery where my father was buried. I'd started visiting him regularly after the Foundation was established, updating him on our progress, telling him about the lives we'd changed, sharing the victories and challenges of the work he'd made possible. "Hi, Dad," I said, settling cross-legged on the grass beside his headstone. "I brought you the annual report." I opened the folder and began reading him the statistics. The number of women we'd helped escape abusive relationships, the patients with cancer we helped survive, the amount of money we'd recovered for fraud victims, the research projects we'd funded, the legislation we'd influenced. "But the numbers don't tell the whole story," I continued. "Yesterday, a woman named Linda. You remember Linda, she was one of Desmond's victims. She told me that she's getting married next month. To a man who treats her like an equal partner, who celebrates her strength instead of trying to diminish it. She said she never thought she'd be able to trust anyone again, but the Foundation helped her learn to trust herself first." I paused, watching a butterfly land on the flowers I'd brought. "And Angel, Dad, you would be so proud of Angel. She's become this incredible advocate, this fierce protector of vulnerable people. She's everything I hoped she would be, but stronger and braver than I ever imagined. She chose to stay and fight alongside me instead of running away from the mess, and I think that choice made her into the woman she was always meant to be." The morning was quiet, peaceful in a way that my life had rarely been during my marriage. No one was monitoring my time, questioning my choices, or making me feel guilty for taking a moment to myself. "I know you trusted Rick to take care of me," I said softly. "And I know you would feel terrible about how wrong you were about him. But Dad, in a weird way, his betrayal was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to find my own strength, to discover who I really was underneath all the conditioning and control. I'm not the same person you worried about leaving behind. I'm someone you would be proud to call your daughter." As I stood to leave, I noticed that someone had left fresh flowers on the grave next to my father's, an elderly woman who had died just a few months ago. The flowers were clearly placed by someone who loved her, someone who was still grieving, still visiting, still honoring her memory. It struck me that this was what real love looked like, not the possessive, controlling dynamic I'd mistaken for devotion in my marriage, but this gentle tending, this ongoing care that asked for nothing in return. That afternoon I had lunch with Georgina to discuss the foundation's expansion plans. We were considering opening satellite offices in other cities, creating a network of support that could reach even more women who needed help. Eileen, Georgina said as we reviewed the budget projections, I have to ask you something and I want you to be honest with me. Okay. Are you happy? Really truly happy? Not just satisfied with your work or proud of what you've accomplished, but actually happy. I considered the question seriously. Happiness had seemed like such a foreign concept during my marriage that I'd almost forgotten it was something I was allowed to pursue. Yes, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. I am happy. Not in the way I thought happiness was supposed to look. I don't have the perfect marriage or the perfect house or the perfect life. But I have something better. I have authenticity. I have purpose. I have relationships based on mutual respect instead of fear and control. I have the freedom to make my own choices, even when they're wrong choices. Georgina smiled. That's the best kind of happiness. The kind you create for yourself instead of waiting for someone else to give you. You know what's funny? I said. Rick used to tell me that I'd never survive without him, that I was too weak and dependent to make it on my own. He genuinely believed that he was doing me a favor by controlling every aspect of my life, that I needed his management to function. And now I realized that I was never weak. I was just exhausted from constantly fighting against someone who was supposed to be on my team. Once I stopped wasting energy on that fight, once I started using my strength for myself instead of against myself, there was no limit to what I could accomplish. 6 months later, I received an invitation that I never expected. A request to speak at a conference on domestic violence prevention hosted by the state prison system. The audience would include corrections officers, social workers, and inmates who were participating in a rehabilitation program focused on understanding the impact of their crimes. Rick would be in the audience. I almost declined. The thought of seeing him again, of being in the same room with the man who had stolen so many years of my life, made my stomach clench with anxiety. I thought about all the women who were still trapped, still believing their abusers' lies about their weakness and dependence. If my story could reach even one of them, if it could plant a seed of doubt about the narrative they'd been fed, then facing Rick would be worth it. The day of the conference, Angel offered to come with me for support, but I declined. This was something I needed to do alone. A final confrontation that would close the circle of my transformation. The prison was exactly what I'd expected. Sterile, institutional, designed to contain rather than heal. But the conference room where I spoke was filled with people who were genuinely trying to understand and change, and that gave me hope. I told my story the way I always did. Honestly, without minimizing Rick's crimes or my own journey from victim to survivor. I talked about the Ficus pot, about the moment when my world shattered and revealed the truth underneath. I discussed the long process of rebuilding my sense of self, of learning to trust my own perceptions again. And I talked about forgiveness, not the kind that excuses or enables, but the kind that frees the forgiver from the burden of carrying someone else's poison. When I finished speaking, there was a long silence. Then a corrections officer raised her hand. Mrs. Kyler, how do you respond to people who say that women like you should have known better, should have left sooner, should have seen the signs? It was a question I'd been asked many times, and it never failed to anger me. I respond by pointing out that abusers are experts at manipulation, I said firmly. They don't start relationships by announcing their intention to control and exploit their partners. They start with love bombing, with excessive attention and affection that feels like the greatest love story ever told. They gradually introduce control tactics so slowly that the victim doesn't notice the shift until they're completely isolated and dependent. Asking why a woman didn't leave sooner is like asking why a frog doesn't jump out of water that's slowly being heated to boiling. The change is so gradual that by the time you realize you're in danger, you've been conditioned to believe that you can't survive outside the pot. After the formal presentation, there was a meet and greet session where attendees could ask individual questions. I was talking to a social worker about the Foundation's programs when I felt someone approach from behind. I turned around and found myself face to face with Rick for the first time in 5 years. He looked older, grayer, diminished in the way that men who derive their power from controlling others often do when that control is stripped away. But his eyes still held that familiar calculating look, as if he was trying to figure out how to manipulate this situation to his advantage. Eileen, he said quietly. Thank you for coming. For speaking to us. I studied his face, looking for signs of genuine remorse, of real understanding of what he'd done. But all I saw was the same self-serving charm he'd always used when he wanted something from me. "Rick," I said calmly. "How are you?" Learning. About myself, about what I did wrong. The counseling here has helped me understand how my behavior affected you and Angel. I want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry." The apology sounded rehearsed, like something he'd practiced in therapy sessions designed to help him say the right words rather than feel the right emotions. "I appreciate that," I said. "I hope the counseling is helping you become a better person." "Eileen, I know I have no right to ask this, but do you think there's any chance for us? In the future, I mean. When I get out. I know I have a lot of work to do, a lot to make up for, but we had 23 years together. That has to count for something." And there it was. The same entitled assumption that had characterized our entire marriage. The belief that his wants and needs should be my primary concern, that his timeline for redemption should dictate my choices, that I owed him consideration simply because he'd managed to occupy space in my life for 2 decades. "Rick," I said gently but firmly, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. I forgive you for what you did to me because carrying anger was destroying my own life. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean pretending that what happened didn't happen, or that you're entitled to a second chance with me." His face began to change, the mask of contrition slipping to reveal the familiar flash of anger underneath. "I've built a life that I love," I continued. "A life based on honesty, respect, and genuine partnership with people who see me as an equal. I would never give that up to return to a relationship built on lies and control, no matter how much therapy you've had or how sorry you claim to be." "But Eileen." "There is no but, Rick. This conversation is over. I wish you well in your rehabilitation, and I hope you use your remaining time here to become someone who would never hurt another woman the way you hurt me. But that person, if he ever exists, will have to build relationships with people who don't know what you're capable of." "I know, and I will never forget." I walked away without looking back, feeling lighter with every step. That evening, I called Angel from my hotel room to tell her about the encounter. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Free," I said without hesitation. "Completely, finally free. For 5 years I've been healing from what he did to me. But there was always this small part of me that wondered if I was being too harsh, if I should be more open to the possibility of redemption. Seeing him today, hearing him try to manipulate me even from prison, it confirmed that I made the right choice. I'm proud of you, Mom. For going, for speaking your truth, and for walking away. You know what the strangest part was? He looked so small. Not physically, but diminished. All those years he seemed so powerful, so in control of everything. But today he just looked like a sad, aging man who had thrown away everything real in pursuit of power over someone else. That's what bullies are underneath all the bluster. Small, scared people who can only feel big by making others feel small. After I hung up with Angel, I sat by the hotel window and thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 5 years ago, I had been a woman who apologized for breaking a plant pot. Tonight, I was a woman who could face her abuser and walk away with her dignity intact. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been built through thousands of small choices. The choice to trust my own perceptions, the choice to seek help, the choice to believe that I deserved better, the choice to use my pain to help others. 1 year later, I stood in the same conference room where I'd thrown the foundation's anniversary party. But this time we were celebrating something even more significant. The Maximiliano Keiler Foundation had just received a $5 million grant from a major philanthropic organization, funding that would allow us to expand our services nationwide. But the real celebration was for the women whose lives had been transformed through our work. Linda Amir had just graduated from law school and would be joining our legal advocacy team. Tamara had finished her book about financial abuse, which had become a bestseller and was being adapted into a documentary. And Angel, my brilliant, fierce daughter, had just been offered a position with the Department of Justice, heading up a new task force on financial crimes against women. She would be leaving the foundation, but her work would continue on a national scale. "I'm nervous about leaving," she confided as we watched the celebration around us. "The foundation has been my whole world for the past 5 years. What if I can't make the same kind of impact in Washington?" "Angel," I said, taking her hands, "you're not leaving the work behind. You're expanding it. Everything you've learned here, every woman you've helped, Every system you've learned to navigate, you're taking all of that to a place where you can change laws, not just lives. She smiled, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. What about you? Will you be okay running the foundation without me? I'll be more than okay. I'll be proud. Your grandfather wanted to help people fight cancer, but what we've built together fights something even more insidious. The cancer of abuse that eats away at women's souls. You're taking that fight to the highest levels of government. He would be so proud of both of us. 5 months after Angel left for Washington, I received a call that brought everything full circle. Mrs. Kyler? This is Detective Caspian with the Portland Police Department. We have a situation here that we think might be connected to your case from a few years ago. My heart skipped. What kind of situation? We've arrested a man named Thomas Francisco. He claims to be related to your ex-husband. He was running a financial fraud scheme targeting elderly women, using forged medical documents to have them declared incompetent. The methods are identical to what your ex-husband and his brother were doing. Rick's cousin. The family business was apparently more extensive than we'd realized. What do you need from me? We'd like you to testify about the pattern of abuse. Help us establish that this is part of a larger criminal enterprise. And Mrs. Kyler? There are 5 victims here. Elderly women who lost their life savings, their homes, their independence. They need someone who understands what they've been through. I was on a plane to Portland the next day. The women I met there were in their 70s and 80s, proud, intelligent women who had been systematically convinced they were losing their minds. The shame and confusion in their eyes was heartbreakingly familiar. Ladies, I said as we sat in the district attorney's conference room, I want you to know that you are not crazy, you are not stupid, and this is not your fault. You were targeted by criminals who specialize in exploiting trust and kindness. But we're going to get your lives back. And we did. Thomas Francisco was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The women recovered most of their stolen assets. More importantly, they recovered their sense of dignity and self-worth. But the best part came 7 months later, when I received a letter from one of the victims, an 82-year-old former teacher named Dorothy Walsh. Dear Eileen, I wanted you to know that I've started volunteering with our local domestic violence shelter, helping other women recognize the signs of financial abuse. At my age, I thought my useful days were behind me. But you showed me that surviving something terrible can be the beginning of the most important work of your life. Thank you for giving me back my purpose. On the 10th anniversary of breaking the Ficus pot, I threw one final party. Not for the foundation, that would continue long after I was gone, but for myself. A celebration of a life reclaimed, a purpose discovered, a woman reborn. The party was small, intimate, held in my apartment with the people who mattered most. Angel was there taking a rare break from her work in Washington. Tamara and her family, Georgina and her partner, Dr. Vance. And a dozen other women whose lives had intersected with mine through our shared journey from victim to survivors. The ficus plant, now enormous and thriving, sat in the place of honor by the window. It had become something of a legend in our community. The plant that broke open a life and revealed the truth underneath. As the evening wound down, Angel found me standing by the plant, lost in thought. What are you thinking about, Mom? I was thinking about that woman who broke this pot 10 years ago. How terrified she was, how small she felt, how convinced she was that she couldn't survive without someone else's approval and protection. Do you miss her? I considered the question seriously. I feel compassion for her. She was doing the best she could with what she knew at the time. But miss her? No. She was never really me, she was just a performance I gave for so long that I forgot it wasn't real. And now I know who I really am. I'm someone who breaks things when they need to be broken. I'm someone who plants new growth in the soil of old lies. I'm someone who turns pain into purpose and trauma into triumph. Angel hugged me tightly. You're someone who saved herself and then saved everyone else she could reach. After everyone left, I sat alone with a cup of tea and a photo album. Not the one from 5 years ago, but a new one documenting the last decade of my life. Pictures of women we'd helped, legislation we'd influenced, lives we'd changed. And there, on the last page, was a picture Angel had taken that very evening. Me standing next to the ficus plant, both of us having grown far beyond what anyone thought possible. I thought about Rick, still in prison, still believing that he was the victim of my vindictiveness rather than the architect of his own destruction. I thought about the other women who were still trapped in relationships like the one I'd escaped, still believing their abusers' lies about their weakness and dependence. But mostly I thought about the future. About the Foundation's continued work, about Angel's impact in Washington, about all the women who would find their strength because we had found ours first. The ficus plant rustled gently in the evening breeze from the open window, its leaves catching the last light of the day. It had survived being uprooted, replanted, and completely transformed. It had grown stronger and more beautiful than it had ever been in its original, constrained environment. Just like me. I picked up my phone and typed a message to post on the Foundation's social media accounts. 10 years ago, I accidentally broke my husband's ficus pot and discovered that my entire life was built on lies. Tonight, I'm sitting next to that same plant, which has grown into something magnificent and strong. Sometimes the most beautiful growth comes from the most devastating breaks. To every woman reading this who feels trapped, who doubts her own strength, who believes she can't survive on her own, you are more powerful than you know. Your life is waiting for you to claim it. Break the pot. Plant yourself in new soil. Grow. Within minutes, the responses started pouring in. Women sharing their own stories of escape and transformation. Others asking for help. Still others offering support and encouragement to those who were still trapped. I smiled and closed the laptop. Tomorrow there would be more work to do, more women to help, more lives to change. But tonight, I was simply a woman who had broken free from a beautiful prison and built something real and meaningful from the pieces. The ficus plant swayed gently in its pot, roots deep and strong, reaching always toward the light. Just like me.